The outsider, the station called Thessaly Prime, hung in the darkness of space like a silver jewel against black velvet. And inside its rotating rings lived more than 200,000 beings from across the known galaxy Kira Vasquez walked through. The central corridor of the Galactic Union Academy with her head down and her shoulders hunched, making herself as small as possible. Even though she was already considered tiny by most species standards, she was the only human enrolled at this prestigious institution. And every single day, she felt that isolation pressing down on her like a physical weight. The other students flowed around her in rivers of color and sound, their alien bodies moving with grace that came from evolving on gentle worlds with low gravity and mild climates. The Velith aristocrats glided past on their 4 slender legs, their pale blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights, their large dark eyes sliding over Kira with barely concealed disdain. They were a beautiful people, delicate and refined, and they considered humans to be little better than animals that had somehow learned to speak. Behind them came a cluster of Korean students, their insectoid bodies towering over everyone else in the corridor, their chitinous armor gleaming like polished obsidian each. Korean stood at least 7 feet tall with 4 powerful arms ending in razor-sharp claws, and their mandibles clicked constantly as they communicated in their high tongue. They moved with the confidence of apex predators, which they were on their homeworld, and they had no concept of keeping their voices low or their movements contained. Kira pressed herself against the wall to let them pass, and they didn't even acknowledge her existence. That was fine with her. That was exactly what she wanted. She had been at the academy for 3 standard months now, and she had perfected the art of being invisible. She sat in the back of every classroom, and she spoke only when called upon by instructors, as she never ever raised her voice or moved too quickly. The other students had noticed her, of course, because a human was still a novelty in this part of the galaxy, but they had quickly dismissed her as uninteresting. They called her the quiet one from the Death Rock when they thought she couldn't hear. They were wrong about that too. Human hearing was far more acute than most galactic species realized. Just one of many things the galaxy didn't understand about her kind. Kira reached her xenobiology classroom and slipped inside, finding her usual seat in the far corner, where the light was dimmest and she could observe without being observed. Room was already half full with students from a dozen different species, all of them chattering and socializing in ways that seemed effortless and natural. She remembered what that felt like. Back on Earth, back home, where she had friends and family and a life that made sense. Here she was just a representative of a species that most of the galaxy considered either terrifying or pathetic depending on who you asked. Earth's classification as a Class 12. Deathworld was well documented in every database in the galaxy, and that classification colored every interaction Kira had with alien species. Class 12 was nearly the maximum possible rating for a planet that still produced intelligent life. It meant that Earth had extreme gravity compared to most inhabited worlds, nearly 3 times the galactic average. It meant that Earth's atmosphere contained oxygen at levels that would corrode most metals and poison most organisms. It meant that Earth's biosphere was packed with apex predators in every single environment. From the deepest oceans to the highest mountains, it meant that disease organisms on Earth mutated and evolved faster than galactic medicine could track, creating plagues that would devastate other species in days. Most aliens who learned about Earth's conditions assumed that humans must be either feral monsters who had clawed their way to sapience through endless violence, or broken survivors who had somehow endured their nightmare world through luck rather than skill. Looking at Kira sitting quietly in her corner, most would assume the latter. She was small by Tovani standards, standing only 5.5 feet tall, where the average Tovani male reached 8 feet. She was thin and soft-looking compared to the armored Korean or the muscular Dreth. She always seemed tired. Her brown eyes half-lidded and her movements slow and careful. She never displayed aggression or competed for status or challenged anyone for anything. She was, by every visible metric, the least threatening being in any room she entered. This was entirely deliberate, what her classmates didn't understand. What they couldn't understand, because they had never lived on a Deathworld, was that Kira was constantly performing a complex act of self-suppression. Every movement she made was carefully controlled to be slower than her natural speed when she walked. She deliberately moved at about 1/3 of her comfortable pace, because her normal walking speed exceeded the sprinting speed of most galactic species. When she spoke, she kept her voice soft and low, because human voices carried with a power that could actually cause pain to species with sensitive hearing, like the Volith when she reached for objects. She moved her hands slowly and telegraphed every motion, because quick movements triggered prey responses in dozens of species, and she didn't want to cause panic. She had learned all of this in the 6 months of preparation before she left Earth. 6 months of training designed to help human diplomats and students integrate into galactic society without causing incidents. Without causing incidents. Instructors have been very clear about the stakes. Earth was new to the galactic community, having only made first contact 15 years ago. Humanity desperately needed allies among the established powers, because there were species out there who looked at Earth's resources and saw only opportunities for exploitation. The only thing protecting Earth was the uncertainty factor. The fact that no one quite knew what humans were capable of, and no one wanted to find out the hard way. Kira's job, her unofficial mission, alongside her official studies, was to present humans as civilized and reasonable and absolutely not worth provoking. So she sat in her corner and she kept her head down and she pretended to be exactly what everyone expected. A tired, broken survivor from a death rock who posed no threat to anyone. The instructor entered the room. The elderly Velith named Professor Tessara, whose specialty was comparative xenobiology across Deathworld species. Kira actually enjoyed this class, even though she was the subject of frequent uncomfortable scrutiny. Professor Tessara was one of the few faculty members who seemed genuinely curious about humans rather than afraid or contemptuous. The class settled into silence as the professor activated the holographic display at the front of the room. Today's subject appeared in glowing letters above her head. Adaptation mechanisms in high-gravity species. Kira felt her stomach sink slightly because she knew where this was going. We will be examining the physical characteristics that allow certain species to thrive in gravitational fields exceeding twice the galactic standard, Professor Tessara announced in her melodic voice. As we have discussed, such environments are extremely rare and typically hostile to complex life. Yet several spacefaring species have emerged from them. The display shifted to show a rotating model of a Dreth, one of the other Deathworld species in the galaxy. The Dreth evolved on a world with 2.3 times standard gravity, and we can see the adaptations clearly. Dense bone structure, redundant organ systems, and musculature that would be considered excessive by any other standard. The model shifted to show the internal structure. Always the Dreth body was built like a living tank. However, Professor Tessara continued, her eyes sliding toward Kira's corner. The Dreth are not the most extreme example of high-gravity adaptation in our records. The display changed again, and Kira felt every eye in the room turn toward Kira. Human figure now rotated in the holographic field. A generic male form with all its biological systems laid bare for examination. Humans evolved on a world with 2.8 times standard gravity, nearly the maximum that can support complex life. And their adaptations are remarkable. Kira kept her expression neutral as the professor began pointing out features that she had lived with her entire life, but that seemed like science fiction to her classmates. Note the skeletal density, which exceeds Dreth levels by approximately 15%. The cardiovascular system, capable of maintaining blood pressure against gravitational forces that would cause immediate organ failure in most species, and the muscular structure that provides what our military analysts estimate to be roughly 4 to 6 times the strength of an equivalent mass Valeth. Murmurs rippled through the classroom, and Kira felt the weight of those stares pressing down on her. Additionally, Professor Tassara continued, humans possess several features that are not directly related to gravity, but are equally notable. A persistence predation adaptation that allows them to maintain physical activity for extraordinary durations. A healing factor that can repair tissue damage that would be fatal to most species. And a neurological system optimized for rapid threat assessment and response. The professor paused and looked directly at Kira. Miss Vasquez, would you care to add anything to this overview from your personal experience? Kira considered her response carefully before speaking in her deliberately soft voice. I think it is important to understand that humans do not experience these adaptations as special or unusual. Professor, to us this is simply what being alive feels like. We do not think of ourselves as strong. The Watcher Chef A had been watching the human for weeks now, studying her movements and her habits and her patterns, with the patience of a hunter who knew that good prey was worth the wait. The third daughter of Hive Admiral Kethros had not risen to her current position among the academies. Social elite by being impulsive or careless, she understood that power came from knowledge, and knowledge came from observations. She watched, and what she saw filled her with a contempt so deep. It was almost physical. The human was pathetic. There was simply no other word for it in any language. Shethkai knew every day the creature shuffled through the corridors like a wounded animal trying not to attract predators, her head down and her body language screaming submission to anyone with eyes to see it. She never challenged anyone for anything. She never asserted herself in class discussions. She never competed for resources or status or attention. She just existed in her quiet little corner of the academy like a piece of furniture that everyone had agreed to ignore. Among the Korean, this behavior would have resulted in immediate expulsion from the hive. Weakness was not tolerated in Shethkai's culture because weakness endangered everyone. A hive member who could not contribute, who could not fight, who could not stand up for themselves was a drain on collective resources and a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. Such individuals were given one chance to prove their worth, and if they failed, they were cast out to survive on their own or die trying. It was harsh by galactic standards, but it had made the Korean one of the most powerful military species in known space, and now here was this human, this representative of the so-called Deathworld species that everyone whispered about with fear in their voices. And she was nothing. Zethuke clicked her mandibles in disgust as she watched the human leave Professor Tazara's classroom. She moves like prey, observed Rethaval, Shethka's clutch sister and most trusted lieutenant, her compound eyes tracking the human's shuffling gait down the corridor. Because she is prey, Shethkai replied. Whatever stories they tell about Earth and its dangers, that creature right there is proof that they are exaggerated. Look at her. She would not last 5 minutes in a Korean nursery. The other 3 members of their hunting pack clicked their agreement. Vexenal was the largest of them, nearly 8 feet tall, with armor plates that had been ritually scarred in patterns that proclaimed his combat victorious. Threk was the fastest. Her forearms, capable of striking with a speed that most species could not even perceive. Korthon was the smartest, always 3 moves ahead in any conflict, always finding the angle that would give them the advantage together. They ruled the academy's social hierarchy through a combination of physical dominance and strategic manipulation. No one challenged them because Challenging a Kareen hunting pack was suicide for any other species, and that was exactly why HFY had decided the human needed to be taught her place, the other. Students are starting to forget their fear, she explained to her pack as they moved through the corridors toward their private meeting chamber. They see this weak creature, and they think that Deathworlders are nothing special, that the warnings about Earth were overblown, that humans are just another minor species to be ignored or exploited. Is that not what we want? Corthan asked, his analytical mind always probing for deeper meaning. No, HFY said firmly. We want the galaxy to fear Deathworlders, but we want them to fear the right Deathworlders. The Kareen emerged from a Class 9 world, and we have built an empire on that reputation. If humans become the face of Deathworld species, and that face is this pathetic creature, then our reputation suffers by association. She stopped walking and turned to face her pack. Her mandibles spread wide in the expression that meant serious business. We need to make an example of her. We need to show everyone that humans are weak, and that Kareen remain the true apex species of the galaxy. One demonstration will be enough to establish the proper hierarchy. Rethavel tilted her head in the gesture of a question. And if she is not as weak as she appears, some of the professors seem to think humans are genuinely dangerous despite appearances. HFY made the clicking sound that served as Kareen laughter. Professors are academics who have never been in real combat. They read data files and they watch recordings, and they think they understand what it means to be a predator. But we are Kareen. We do not read about hunting, we hunt. And I have watched this human for 3 months. She is no threat to anyone. The pack accepted their leader's assessment because HFY had never been wrong before her. Instincts for identifying weakness were legendary, even among a species known for such abilities. If she said the human was prey, then the human was prey. They spent the next week refining their plan. The key was choosing the right location, somewhere private enough that there would be no interference, but not so isolated that it would look like premeditated assault. The maintenance corridors near the xenobiology labs were perfect. They were used primarily by service drones and only occasionally by students taking shortcuts between. Building security cameras existed, but the coverage was spotty, and the footage was rarely reviewed unless someone filed a complaint, and the human would not file a complaint because she would be too broken to do anything except learn her lesson. The timing was equally important. They needed to catch her alone, away from any potential witnesses or allies. Though HFY doubted the human had any allies given her complete failure to form social bonds with anyone at the academy, the end of the afternoon xenobiology lab was ideal. The human always stayed late to avoid the crowds, and she always took the maintenance corridor shortcut back to her dormitory section. They had tracked her route for 2 weeks, and she never deviated from the pattern. Creatures have had it made the easiest prey. What do we do with her once we have her cornered? Vexenal asked, his combat-scarred arms flexing in anticipation. Nothing permanent, HFY replied. We are not trying to start an interspecies incident. We are simply teaching her the natural order of things. Some roughing up, some humiliation, maybe a few minor injuries that will heal. Enough to make the point without giving the administrators an excuse to get involved. She paused, considering, and we record everything. Then we make sure the footage spreads through the student networks. By the time the administrators find out, it will be too late to suppress, and everyone will see exactly what humans really are. Corthan nodded approvingly. Elegant. We establish dominance, we damage their reputation, and we create plausible deniability all at the same time. If questioned, we simply say it was a cultural misunderstanding, a Kareen greeting ritual that the human misinterpreted. Exactly, HFY said. The human will be too frightened to contradict us, and even if she does, who will believe the Deathrock weakling over the daughter of a Hive Admiral? The plan was set, the date was chosen. Pack was ready on the designated day. HFY positioned her hunting pack in the maintenance corridor an hour before the xenobiology lab was scheduled to end. They spread out to cover both exits, ensuring that their prey would have nowhere to run when the trap closed. Vex now took the far end of the corridor where it connected to the main dormitory section. Threshka positioned herself in a side alcove where she could cut off any attempt to retreat back toward the lab. Skorthan and Rethaval flanked HFY in the center of the corridor where they would confront the human directly. They waited in the dim lighting, their compound eyes perfectly adapted to the shadows, their bodies still as statues in the way that only Karen could manage. Minutes past the lab session ended, and students began filtering out through the main corridors, their voices and footsteps echoing faintly through the station structure. Then silence as the building emptied. Then, finally, the sound they were waiting for. Soft footsteps approaching from the direction of the xenobiology labs. The distinctive shuffle of someone who was trying very hard not to be noticed. Sifilke felt her hunting instincts flare to life as the human rounded the corner and entered the corridors. The prey had arrived. Kira stopped walking as she saw the 5 Kareen forms blocking her path, her tired eyes widening slightly in what HFY interpreted as fear. Human, HFY announced, stepping forward with her mandibles spread in the threat display. We need to have a conversation about your place in this academy. The human said nothing. She just stood there, her body completely still, her hands hanging loose at her side. HFY took another step forward, and her pack moved with her, forming a semicircle around the human and cutting off any possibility of escape. You have been here for 3 months now, and you have done nothing but embarrass your species. You shuffle around like a wounded grub. You never assert yourself. You never compete. You never do anything that suggests you deserve to be here among civilized beings. Still, the human said nothing. Her silence was beginning to irritate. Chef Capri was supposed to cower, to beg, to try to negotiate or flee. This human was doing none of those things. Was just standing there watching them with an expression that Chef Kai suddenly could not read at all. We are going to teach you what happens to weak prey in the real galaxy. Chef Kai continued, shaking off her momentary uncertainty. Consider this an educational experience, something to help you understand that Deathworld, or not, you are nothing compared to the Kareen. 11 seconds. The fight lasted 11 seconds from start to finish. Later, when the security footage was analyzed frame by military experts from 6 different species, those 11 seconds would become the most studied combat engagement in Academy history. But in the moment, there was no analysis, no careful examination, no intellectual understanding of what was happening. There was only violence, pure and absolute and terrifying in its efficiency. When Chef Kai lunged, something deep inside Kira Vasquez woke up. It was not a conscious decision. It was not something she chose to do. It was something far older and far more primal than choice. Something written into her DNA by millions of years of evolution on a world where hesitation meant death. Her ancestors had survived ice ages and predators, and plagues and each other. They had hunted mammoths with wooden spears, and they had fought cave lions with their bare hands, and they had endured conditions that would have wiped out any other species in the Claydays galaxy. All of that history, all of that brutal, beautiful struggle for survival, lived in Kira's bones and blood and muscle memory. And when the threat came, when the claws reached for her, when her life was genuinely at risk for the first time since arriving at this soft, safe station full of soft, safe creatures who had never known what it meant to truly fight for survival, all of it woke up at once. Kira did not think about what she was. Doing thinking was too slow. Instead, she simply moved, her body flowing through combat responses that had been drilled into every human child on Earth since the moment they could walk. She sidestepped Chef Kai's lunge with a pivot that used the carry's own momentum against her. A basic judo principle that worked even better in low gravity than it did on Earth. Her hands found the joints in the chitinous armor, the gaps where the exoskeleton segments connected, the vulnerable points that every armored species tried to protect. She applied pressure and leverage in a precise combination that hyperextended the joint past its structural limits. Chitin cracked ZK screamed. The sound was still echoing through the corridor when Kira released her grip and spun to face the next threat. Threshka was fast by Kareen standards, her forearms striking with a speed that most galactic species could not even perceive. To Kira, she might as well have been moving through water. Human reflexes had evolved to track and predict the movements of creatures that could cross the distance between safety and death in the blink of an eye. Snakes that struck faster than the eye could follow, big cats that could accelerate from 0 to lethal velocity in a heartbeat. Other humans, with all their creativity and unpredictability and capacity for violence, compared to those threats, Threshka's strikes were almost leisurely. Kira slipped past the first arm and blocked the second with her forearm, feeling the impact shudder through her bones, but absorbing it easily thanks to a skeletal structure designed to handle 3 times standard gravity. The third arm she caught and redirected, using it to pull Threshka off balance. The fourth arm she ignored because it was aimed at where she had been, not where she was going. Then she was inside Threshka's guard, inside the reach of those dangerous arms, and her fist connected with the nerve cluster at the base of the carry's thorax. It was a precise strike, delivered with exactly enough force to overwhelm the nervous system without causing permanent damage. Eshka went limp and collapsed to the floor, unconscious before she even knew what had hit her. 3 seconds had passed and Vexenal came at her from behind, his massive arms sweeping in an attack designed to crush whatever they caught. He was the strongest of the pack, his combat record impressive even by Turing standards, and he had never faced an opponent who could match him for raw physical power. He was about to discover what it felt like. Kira heard him coming, her ears tracking the displacement of air and the subtle vibrations of his footsteps through the floor with a precision that would have seemed supernatural to anyone who did not understand human sensory capabilities. She did not turn to face him because she did not need to. Instead, she dropped low and swept her leg in an arc that caught Vexenal at the ankles, a point where his armor offered no protection because Kareen's legs were not designed for that kind of attack. His own momentum did the rest, sending him crashing to the floor with a force that cracked the deck plating. Before he could recover, Kira was on top of him, her hands finding another nerve cluster, another precise application of pressure. And then he too was unconscious. 5 seconds had passed. The Korthan was the smartest of the pack, and he understood immediately that this situation had gone catastrophically wrong. He did not try to fight. Instead, he tried to run, his mind already calculating escape routes and explanations, and ways to spin this disaster into something survivable. He made it 3 steps before Kira caught him. She did not strike him the way she had struck the others because he was not attacking her, and she did not kill beings who were not immediate threats. Instead, she simply restrained him, her arms wrapping around his thorax in a hold that immobilized all 4 of his limbs simultaneously. "Stop," she said, and her voice was calm despite everything that had just happened. Ed Korthan stopped. He stopped because he had no choice, because the grip holding him was impossible to break, because every instinct in his body was suddenly screaming that he was in the presence of something that could end him without effort. 8 seconds had passed. Varethel was still standing in the same spot where she had activated her recording device. Her compound eyes wide and her mandibles hanging slack in the Korean expression of absolute shock. The recording was still running. It had captured everything. Kira released Corthan and stepped back, her eyes moving across the corridor and taking in the damage she had done. Seth Kai was on the ground, clutching her broken arm and making sounds that were somewhere between screams and whimpers. Threshka and Vexenel were unconscious, their bodies sprawled across the floor in positions that would have been comical if the situation were not so serious. Corthan was frozen in place, his analytical mind still trying to process what had just happened and failing completely, and Rethival was watching her with an expression that Kira recognized because she had seen it many times before on the faces of animals who had suddenly realized they were not the predator in this encounter. 11 seconds had passed. The fight was over. Kira stood in the center of the corridor, breathing hard but not from exertion. The physical effort of taking down 5 Korean had been minimal, barely enough to elevate her heart rate. No. She was breathing hard because the adrenaline was surging through her system, and she was fighting to control it, fighting to push down the ancient instincts that were screaming at her to finish what she had started, to eliminate the threats permanently, to make sure they could never hurt her again. That was the dark side of being a Deathworlder. The part that the training never quite managed to erase. Humans were not just strong and fast and resilient. They were also incredibly violent by galactic standards. Their history written in blood and conquest and war after endless war. Every human alive carried that legacy in their genes. The capacity for destruction that had allowed their species to dominate a world where everything wanted to kill them. Kira had spent her entire life learning to control that capacity, to channel it, to keep it locked away except in moments of genuine need. But here, now, with 5 alien predators who had attacked her without provocation, the locks were straining. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly in and out, a meditation technique that every human child learned before they learned to read. She reminded herself where she was and what was at stake and why she could not, absolutely could not, let the darkness take control. When she opened her eyes again, the worst of the urge had passed. She looked down at Shethkai, who was still writhing on the ground, and she felt something unexpected. Pity. These Korean had attacked her because they thought she was weak. They had misread every signal, every piece of her careful performance, every deliberate display of harmlessness. They had looked at her and seen prey because that was all their instincts knew how to see. They had never considered, never even imagined, that what they were looking at was a predator wearing a mask. I did not want this, Kira said, her voice quiet again, controlled again, the soft, careful tone that she had used for 3 months sliding back into place, like armor. I have spent every day since I arrived here trying to avoid exactly this, trying to show that humans can be peaceful, can be trusted, can integrate into galactic society without violence. She knelt beside Shethkai, and the Korean flinched away from her, mandibles clicking in terror. But you did not give me a choice. You cornered me, and you threatened me, and you tried to hurt me. And there are some things that no amount of training can overcome. Shethkai stared at her, compound eyes wide with pain and fear and dawning comprehension. What are you? She managed to click out through the agony of her broken arm. Kira considered the question. It was a good question. Maybe the most important question any alien had asked her since she arrived. What was she? She was a diplomat's daughter who had volunteered for this mission because she believed in the possibility of peace between species. She was a student who genuinely wanted to learn about the galaxy. And in as many wonderful cultures, she was a representative of humanity who had dedicated herself to proving that her species could be trusted. But she was also something else. She was a Deathworlder. The combat master Vethros? Kane had seen many things in his long career. had fought in the trenches of the Valdris campaign where Tovani soldiers had held a fortified position for 6 months against overwhelming odds. He had led the assault on the Kareen fortress world of Chethvar, where his battalion had been outnumbered 5-1 and had still emerged victorious. He had faced down pirates and warlords and assassins and every manner of threat the galaxy could produce. He had trained warriors from dozens of species, and he had studied the combat capabilities of dozens more. He had thought he understood what beings were capable of, what the limits of physical performance looked like across the spectrum of galactic life. He had been wrong. The scene before him in this maintenance corridor was impossible by everything he knew. 5 Kareen warriors, all from the Academy's elite social circles, all with formal combat training, all in peak physical condition, lay scattered across the floor like broken toys. Standing among them was a single human female. Small and soft-looking and apparently uninjured, Vethros had watched the last few seconds of the engagement from the shadows at the end of the corridor. Drawn by the sounds of combat and the screaming, what he had seen defied explanation. The human had moved with a speed and precision that exceeded anything in his farce experience. She had not fought like a trained soldier or a practiced martial artist. She had fought like a force of nature, like gravity or entropy, inevitable and overwhelming and completely indifferent to the expectations of those who stood against her. And then she had stopped. That was almost more impressive than the combat itself. He had seen the moment when she closed her eyes and forced herself back under control. The visible effort of will required to restrain instincts that were clearly pushing her toward something far more final than unconscious opponents and broken limbs. Any Tovani warrior who had just won such a decisive victory would have been riding the surge of battle joy, celebrating their dominance, asserting their superiority over their fallen enemies. This human had looked almost sad. Vethros finished his slow clap and stepped into the corridor proper, his 8 feet of scarred gray muscle moving with a deliberate care that was meant to show he posed no threat. He had not survived 3 wars by being careless around dangerous beings. 11 seconds, he said, keeping his voice calm and measured. I counted 11 seconds from the first attack to the last opponent falling. That is remarkable by any standard. The human watched him approach with an alertness that told him she was still ready to fight if necessary. Good. That was the correct response. A true warrior never let their guard down until they were certain that engagement was over. 5 opponents, Vethros continued, stopping at a respectful distance. All Kareen, a Class 9 combat species with natural armor and superior reach, all with formal martial training from one of the most prestigious military academies in their empire. He looked around at the fallen bodies, noting the precise nature of each injury. And you held back. It was not a question. Could see the evidence clearly. A human who had truly wanted to kill these Kareen would have done so easily based on what he had just witnessed. Instead, every injury was precise and controlled, designed to disable without permanently damaging. That level of restraint under combat conditions required either extensive training or an almost supernatural degree of self-control. Probably both. The human met his gaze, and Vethros felt something he had not experienced in decades. Genuine uncertainty about whether he could win a fight. It was not a pleasant feeling, but he respected it. I did not want to hurt them, the human said, and her voice was quiet and careful in a way that Vethros now recognized as deliberate suppression. She was still holding back, still controlling herself, still wearing the mask that she had clearly worn since arriving at the academy. No, Vethros agreed. You wanted to survive. There is a difference. He moved past her to examine the fallen Kareen, checking vital signs and assessing injuries with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless combat wounds. "This one has a compound fracture of the primary arm joint," he said, indicating Shethkai. "Painful, but it will heal completely in about 6 standard weeks. These two are simply unconscious, with no apparent injuries beyond bruising. This one appears to have a strained joint in the upper thorax. And this one," he looked at Rethoval, who was still standing frozen with her recording device in her hands. "This one appears to be completely unharmed, except perhaps psychologically." Vethros straightened and turned back to the human. "I reviewed your entrance evaluations before you arrived at the academy," he said. "I do that for all incoming students because part of my job is identifying potential security threats." He saw her tense slightly at the word threat, and he filed that reaction away for later analysis. "Your combat aptitude scores were mediocre at best. Slow reflexes, poor aggression markers, minimal threat response. The evaluators concluded that you posed no danger to other students and required no special monitoring." He let out a rumbling sound that was the Tovani equivalent of a laugh. "You fooled everyone. Either that or you fooled yourself." The human's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been guilt crossing her features. "On Earth," she said slowly, "we learn to control it from childhood. The aggression, the reflexes, the instincts. If we did not, then we would tear each other apart. Our entire civilization is built on the ability to suppress what we really are." Vethros nodded. He was beginning to understand something. That the entrance evaluators and the professors and every other being at this academy had completely missed. They had looked at this human and seen weakness, because she displayed none of the obvious markers of strength that other species used. They had not considered that her apparent weakness was itself a form of strength, a discipline so ingrained that it had become invisible. "Your homeworld did not just make you strong," he said. "It made you dangerous, more dangerous than any species I have ever encountered. And then it taught you to hide that danger so completely that even trained observers could not see it." He gestured at the fallen Kareen. "These fools woke something they did not understand. They thought they were ambushing prey. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping predator." The human's eyes flickered with something that might have been shame or might have been fear of herself. "I spent 3 months building a reputation," she said. 3 months showing everyone that humans can be peaceful and civilized and trustworthy. And now all of that is gone, destroyed in 11 seconds. "Destroyed," Vethros repeated. "Or transformed. Reputation is not just about being harmless. It is about being predictable. You were predictable before as the quiet, inoffensive human who posed no threat to anyone. Now you will be predictable as something else." He heard footsteps approaching from both ends of the corridor. Station security finally responding to alerts triggered by the sounds of combat and the stress. "Signatures of injured beings. Security is coming," he said. "I will handle them." This was clearly self-defense, and I witnessed enough to confirm that there will be an investigation, but it will conclude in your favor. The human looked surprised. "You are going to help me." "I'm going to claim you," Vethros corrected. "There is a difference. What you displayed here is too valuable to waste. You have abilities that could be refined and developed into something extraordinary. And I intend to make sure that development happens under my supervision." He fixed her with the stare he usually reserved for terrifying new recruits into compliance. "Report to my training hall tomorrow at 0600 station time." "I am not enrolled in any combat courses," the human said, a hint of resistance in her voice. "You are now." Security arrived in the form of 4 Velith officers and 2 automated drones, their weapons drawn and their expressions confused as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Vethros stepped forward to intercept them, his authority as combat master giving him standing to take control of the situation. This was a case of self-defense, he announced in a voice that brooked no argument. 5 students attacked a single individual who responded with proportionate force to protect herself. I witnessed the final moments of the engagement and can confirm that the defender acted appropriately under the circumstances. The lead security officer looked from Vethros to the human to the fallen Kareen and back again. Combat Master. Are you certain? This is Shethkai, daughter of Hive Admiral Kethros. Her family will demand explanations. Then her family can review the recording that one of their own was making throughout the incident. Vethros replied, pointing at Rethval, who still clutched the device in numb hands. I suspect they will find it very educational. He turned to look at the human one more time. Go to your quarters. Miss Vasquez, do not speak to anyone about this until the official investigation is complete. I will make sure you are not disturbed. The human hesitated for a moment, clearly uncertain whether to trust this sudden lie. Then she nodded once and walked away, moving past the security officers with that same careful, controlled gait that Vethros now knew was a deliberate disguise. He watched her go and felt something he had not felt in many years. Genuine anticipation for the future. This human was a puzzle, a weapon, a diplomat, and a threat all wrapped into one small, unassuming package. Training her was going to be the most interesting challenge of his career behind him. The security officers began the process. The investigation. 3 days after the incident in the maintenance corridor, Kira received a formal summons to appear before the Academy's administrative review board. She had been expecting this. What she had not expected was the scope of what awaited her. The hearing chamber was the largest she had ever seen on the station. A circular room designed to accommodate representatives from any species in the galaxy. Dozens of seats rose in tiers around a central speaking platform, and nearly every seat was occupied. She recognized faculty, members and administrators from the Academy. She recognized security officers and legal advisors from the station civilian authority. She recognized diplomatic attaches from at least 15 different species, including her own. The Earth representative being a stern-faced woman named Director Chun, who had overseen Kira's preparation before departure, and she recognized the Korean delegation, a group of armored officials who sat together in one section of the chamber with expressions that ranged from fury to cold calculation. Sethik was not present, but her father, Hive Admiral Kethros, was, his massive form dominating the Korean section like a dark star around which lesser beings orbited. Combat Master Vethros stood near the entrance, his presence a silent reminder that Kira had at least one ally in this room. Kira Vasquez, announced the presiding administrator, an elderly Velith named Chancellor Mothra, whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for thoroughness. You are summoned to this hearing to provide testimony regarding the events of 3 days ago in Maintenance Corridor 7B. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Kira stepped onto the speaking platform and faced the assembled officials. I understand. Chancellor, the purpose of this hearing is to determine the facts of the incident and to assess appropriate responses from all relevant authorities. Chancellor Mothra continued. You will have the opportunity to give your account of events, after which other parties may ask questions. Do you have legal representation? She does, Director Chen said, standing. Earth Diplomatic Corps has assigned counsel to Miss Vasquez for these proceedings. A young human male rose from beside Director Chen and walked down to stand next to Kira on the platform. David Okonkwo, Earth Diplomatic Corps Legal Division, he said. I will be advising Miss Vasquez throughout this hearing. Chancellor Mothra nodded. Very well. Let us begin with the factual record. We have reviewed security footage from the corridor, recording captured by one of the involved parties, and medical reports regarding injuries sustained. Miss Vasquez, please describe in your own words what occurred. Kira had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times over the past 3 days. The aftermath. Kira sat alone in her quarters, staring at the ceiling without really seeing it. The adrenaline had finally faded, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. She had been in her room for 3 hours since the incident in the maintenance corridor, and she had not moved from her bed except to remove her shoes. The notification light on her personal terminal blinked constantly, indicating messages she had no intention of reading. She could guess what most of them contained by now. The recording had spread through the Academy's student networks. That much was inevitable, given how information moved in any social environment. Every student on the station had probably seen the footage of her taking down 5 Kareen in 11 seconds. Every professor had probably been briefed. Every administrator was probably trying to figure out how to handle the fallout, and somewhere in whatever encrypted communication system they used, Earth's diplomatic corps was probably having a very intense discussion about what to do with her. She had failed. That was the simple truth at the center of everything. Else she had been sent here to prove that humans could be trusted, that they could integrate peacefully into galactic society, that they were not the monsters their homeworld suggested, and instead she had proven exactly the opposite. She had shown the entire Academy what a human was really capable of. When pushed, she had demonstrated that all her quiet, harmless behavior was just a mask, a performance, a careful act designed to hide the predator underneath. Now everyone knew the truth. Now everyone would look at her and see the creature from the Deathworld, the product of millions of years of violent evolution, the being who could destroy trained warriors in seconds without even trying. All her careful work, all her patient diplomacy, all the relationships she might have built over years of careful integration, gone in 11 seconds of instinctive violence. Kira closed her eyes and tried to imagine what came next. The Academy would probably ask her to leave, not officially expel her because the incident was clearly self-defense, but they would find a way to encourage her departure. Perhaps a suggestion that she would be more comfortable elsewhere. Perhaps a quiet word about how her presence was disruptive to the learning environment. She would return to Earth and explain to the diplomatic corps what had happened. They would be disappointed but understanding because they had always known this was a risk. They had warned her about the difficulty of suppressing human instincts in genuinely threatening situations. Some people simply could not maintain the mask when their lives were at stake. She would be reassigned to some other role, something that did not involve direct contact with alien species, something safe and contained, where her capabilities would not cause problems and humans would have to wait another generation for someone else to try again. The thought hurt more than she expected. She had wanted this to work. She had believed it could work. She spent her entire life preparing for the moment when humanity would take its place among the galactic community, not as a threat to be feared or a resource to be exploited, but as a genuine partner in building a better future. Now that dream felt impossibly distant. A chime sounded from her door, indicating a visitor. Kira considered ignoring it. Then the chime sounded again, more insistently. Then a voice came through the intercom, a clicking alien voice that she recognized despite her exhaustion. "Human, I know you are in there. Please open the door. I am alone, and I mean you no harm." Kira sat up slowly, her mind struggling to process this development. That voice belonged to Rethival, the Kareen who had been recording the attack, one of the 5 who had cornered her in the maintenance corridor. Why would she be here? What could she possibly want? The chime sounded again. "Please," Rethival said, and there was something in her voice that Kira had never heard from a Kareen before. Uncertainty. "I need to speak with you. It is important." Against her better judgment, Kira stood and walked to the door. She activated the controls, and it slid open to reveal Rethival standing in the corridor alone. her forearms folded against her thorax in what Kira recognized as a Kareem posture of submission. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Rethival lowered her head in a deep bow. The most profound gesture of respect in Korean culture. A gesture that was never given to beings considered inferior. "May I come in?" she asked. Her mandibles clicking softly, Kira stepped as Rethival entered and the door closed behind her, sealing them both in the small human standard quarters for several seconds. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Rethival lifted her head and met Kira's eyes. "We did not know," she said. "We thought you were prey. We looked at you, and we saw weakness and submission and fear. And we believed that was all you were. We were wrong." Kira felt too tired to respond with diplomacy. "Yes," she said simply. "You were wrong. My clutch sister will recover," Rethival continued. "The medical staff say her arm will heal completely in 6 standard weeks. The others are already awake and being treated for minor injuries. No permanent damage was done." "I know," Kira said. "I was careful." Rethival made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You were careful. You were defending yourself against 5 attackers, and you took the time to be careful. I have seen trained Korean warriors who cannot manage that level of control." She paused, her compound eyes studying Kira with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable under other circumstances. "Why did you hold back? You could have killed us. I saw what you are capable of. You could have ended all 5 of us in those 11 seconds, and no one would have blamed you." Kira considered the question that deserved an honest answer. "Because killing is easy," she said slowly. "Controlling the instinct to kill is hard. Any predator can destroy threats. It takes something more to choose not to, even when those threats attacked you without provocation. Especially then. If I had killed you, then your death would have been on my hands forever. I would have to live with that choice for the rest of my life. And for what? Because you made a mistake. Because you misjudged me. That is not worth taking a life over." Rethival was silent for a long moment among the Korean. She said finally, "We have a saying, the strongest hive is the one that never needs to prove its strength. I never understood it before. Strength to us means dominance. It means crushing opposition and asserting superiority. But you are stronger than anyone I have ever met. And you proved it by choosing not to use that strength." She bowed again, not as deeply as before, but with what seemed like genuine feeling. "I came to apologize. What we did was wrong, not just because you were able to defeat us, but because we attacked someone who had done nothing to deserve it. We let our prejudice and our arrogance blind us to what was right." Kira felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she had not realized she was carrying. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." "There is something else," Rethival said, straightening. "The recording I made, it has spread through the student networks. Everyone has seen it by now." Kira's stomach sank. "I assumed as much. What you may not know is how people are reacting," Rethival continued. "I have been monitoring the discussions while I waited for you to answer your door. The responses are not what I expected." She activated her personal device and projected a holographic display, showing scrolling feeds of student comments and discussions. Kira watched. Her exhaustion, momentarily forgotten, the reactions were indeed not what she had expected. There was fear. Yes, plenty of students expressing alarm about having a real Deathworlder in their midst. There was anger from Chef Kai's supporters demanding punishment and expulsion, but there was also something else. Respect, curiosity, wonder students from species that had previously ignored her were expressing fascination. With human capabilities, academic discussions were springing up about Deathworld evolution and the implications for galactic understanding of combat potential, and scattered throughout the feeds were messages of support. Beings who had themselves been bullied by Chef Kai's pack expressing gratitude that someone had finally stood up to them. You are famous now, Rethival said. Infamous to some, but famous nonetheless. The quiet human from the Death Rock is the most talked about being on the station. Kira did not know how to feel about that. It was not the reputation she had wanted to build. It was not the path she had planned, but perhaps. She thought slowly. Perhaps it was not entirely a disaster either. I should go, Rethival said. The medical staff will be wondering where I am. But I wanted you to know that not everyone sees what happened as a negative. Some of us are starting to understand that we never really knew what humans were. She moved toward the door, then paused. And for what it is worth, I think you will make a better ally than the enemy my clutch sister tried to create. The door opened, and she left. Kira stood alone in her quarters, looking at the holographic display still. Projecting student reactions, she thought about what Rethival had said. She thought about Combat Master Vethros and his unexpected offer. She thought about the recordings spreading through networks far beyond the academy, reaching other stations and other worlds, and eventually, perhaps, Earth itself. She thought about the dream she had carried since childhood, the hope that humans could find their place among the stars. Maybe, she thought, maybe there was more than one way to build that place. Maybe being trusted did not require being harmless. Maybe being respected was just as valuable as being liked. The training hall, the combat training facility, was located in the station's central hub, a massive cylindrical space that could adjust its gravity from 0 to 4 times standard, depending on the needs of the training exercise at 0600 station time. Kira stood outside the main entrance, wearing the standard Academy athletic uniform and feeling more uncertain than she had since her first day on Thessaly Prime. The door opened before she could knock. Combat Master Vethros Kane stood inside, his scarred gray form silhouetted against the bright training lights behind him. You are early, he said. Good. That tells me something about your discipline. Kira stepped inside, and the door sealed behind her. The training hall was enormous, easily large enough to hold several hundred beings. But right now, it was empty except for the two of them. The floor was covered in impact-absorbing material, and the walls were lined with weapons and training equipment from dozens of different species. I was not sure I should come, Kira admitted. After yesterday, I thought maybe it would be better to keep a low profile until things calmed down. Vethros made the rumbling sound that she now recognized as Torvani. Laughter. Keep a low profile. Miss Vasquez, there is no such thing as a low profile for you anymore. Your recording has been viewed over 4 million times since yesterday. You are the most famous student this academy has ever had. He walked toward the center of the training floor, and Kira followed, her eyes taking in the unfamiliar environment. Before we begin, I want to be clear about something, Vethros said, stopping and turning to face her. I did not bring you here to learn how to fight. You already know how to fight. What you demonstrated yesterday was raw instinct refined by training. The question is not whether you can fight, but how you choose to use that ability. Kira nodded slowly. What do you want to teach me then? Control, Vethros said. You have it to a degree that impressed me. The fact that you held back during the fight proves that. But you are still operating on suppression. You push down your instincts and hope they stay down. That works most of the time. But when you are pushed hard enough, the suppression breaks and the instincts take over completely. He began walking in a slow circle around her. I want to teach you something different. I want to teach you integration, instead of suppressing what you are. I want you to learn to channel it, to access your capabilities deliberately and precisely, rather than having them erupt when your control slips. Is that possible? Kira asked. The training I received on Earth focused entirely on suppression. They said that human instincts are too strong to manage any other way. Your trainers on Earth were working from theory. Vethros said, I am working from experience. I have trained warriors from 18 different species, including 3 other Deathworld species. The methods vary, but the principle is the same. You do not defeat what you are by fighting against it. You defeat it by making it work for you. He stopped his circling and faced her directly. Show me your stance. Kira settled into the basic defensive posture she had learned in childhood. Weight balanced, hands up, feet positioned to allow quick movement in any direction. Vethros studied her for a moment, then shook his head. That is a suppression stance. It is designed to minimize your threat profile and give you options for retreat. Everything about it says, I do not want to fight. Show me your real stance. The one you used in the corridor. Kira hesitated. I do not have a real stance. What happened in the corridor was pure reaction. I did not think about positioning or form. Exactly, Vethros said. That is the problem. When you suppress your instincts, you lose access to them completely. When the suppression breaks, the instincts take over completely. There is no middle ground, no controlled access. No choice. He moved to a weapons rack and selected 2 training staffs, tossing one to Kira, who caught it reflexively. We are going to find that middle ground. We are going to teach your conscious mind and your instincts to work together instead of against each other. It will not be easy, and it will not be fast, but when we are done, you will be something new. Not a human pretending to be harmless, and not a human losing control to violence, but a human who chooses exactly how much of their capability to use in any situation. He settled into his own stance. The training staff held ready. Now, attack me. Kira looked at the staff in her hands, then back at the massive Tovani warrior who stood across from her combat master. I do not want to hurt you. Vethros laughed again, louder this time. Miss Vasquez, I have been fighting since before your grandmother was born. I have faced the best warriors from 100 worlds, and I am still standing. I appreciate your concern, but I assure you it is unnecessary. He gestured with his staff. Attack me, and do not hold back. I need to see what I'm working with. Kira took a breath and adjusted her grip on the staff. She had been trained in basic staff combat as part of her Earth preparation, enough to defend herself in formal dueling situations if necessary, but that training had been built around suppression, around controlled movements and careful responses. Vethros was asking for something different. He was asking for her real capability. She attacked. The first strike was tentative, a testing jab that Vethros deflected easily. The second was slightly faster, slightly harder, and Vethros deflected that too. Harder, he said. You are still holding back. Let me see what you can really do. Kira felt the familiar resistance inside her. The training that told her to always control herself, to never show her true speed or strength, to keep the predator locked away. But Vethros was giving her permission to let it out, and something in her wanted to accept that permission very much. She attacked again. This time she let some of the suppression slip. Not all of it, not the complete release that had happened in the corridor, but enough to let her real speed show. The staff whistled through the air, and Vethros had to move quickly to block it. Better, he said. Again. She attacked again, faster this time, and again. And again, each strike released a little more of what she had been holding back each block from. Vethros showed her that he could handle what she was releasing. The rhythm built. Attack and block, attack and block. And Kira felt herself settling into something that was neither full suppression nor complete release. It was, she realized with a shock of recognition, exactly what Vethros had described. It was integration. She was still in control, still making choices about each strike, still aware of her surroundings and her opponent and the consequences of her actions. But she was also accessing her full capabilities, moving at speeds that would have been impossible if she were still trying to suppress everything. She was both the diplomat and the predator at the same time, and it felt amazing. Vethros increased his own speed, pushing her harder, forcing her to reach deeper into her reserves to keep up. They moved across the training floor in a dance of wood and motion, their staffs cracking together with impacts that would have shattered bone if either had. Struck flesh, Kira lost track of time. She existed only in the flow of combat. The endless sequence of attack and defense and counter and response. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt completely herself, not the mask she wore for others, and not the monster she feared becoming, just herself. Kira Vasquez, human, Deathworlder, diplomat's daughter, student, warrior, all of it at once, all of it integrated, all of it under her control. Vathros called a halt, and Kira stopped immediately. Her staff frozen mid-swing, her breathing elevated but steady. That, Vathros said. And there was something like satisfaction in his voice. That is what we are going to build on. You found it faster than I expected, the integration state. The place where instinct and choice work together instead of against each other? Kira lowered her staff. Still processing what had just happened. I have never felt anything like that before. Of course not. You were trained to suppress, not to integrate. But now you know it is possible. Now you have a target to aim for. The rest is practice. He walked to the edge of the training floor and set down his staff. We will meet here every morning at 0600. I will clear your schedule with the administration. Consider combat training your new primary focus until I say otherwise. Kira started to object, then stopped. She had come to the academy to study xenobiology and interspecies diplomacy, to prepare for a career building bridges between humans and other species, but everything had changed yesterday. Maybe this was what she needed now, maybe learning to control her capabilities was more important than learning to hide them. What about my other classes? She asked. You will continue attending them as normal, Vathros said. Your academic work should not suffer, but your priorities have shifted. You are not just a diplomat anymore. Ms. Vasquez, you are a symbol. And symbols need to know how to handle themselves when the galaxy is watching. He moved to the door and activated the controls. Same time tomorrow. Do not be late. The door opened and Kira saw that a small crowd had gathered in the corridor outside. Students from various species trying to catch a glimpse of the famous human who had defeated 5. Kareem Vathros stepped into the corridor and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship. Training session is over, he announced. Anyone who wants to watch will have to wait for the formal exhibition matches. Now disperse before I decide to add extra laps to someone's fitness evaluation. The crowd scattered and Kira walked out into the corridor, her mind still processing everything that had happened.